a man who is an icon at Immunotec, who has played a significant role in the development of bringing this product to market, the education of people about glutathione, not only in our company, certainly, but beyond our company, in the medical research world, in the medical world, and also just people who want to be healthy, who found out about glutathione, is going to be our first real speaker today. He's going to share a number of things with you. So I want to welcome on the call my good friend for 25 years, somebody who's all of our good friend, and that's the great Dr. Jimmy Gutman. And Jimmy has written some books on glutathione that are bestsellers.
Yeah, wow. I'm just thinking we're talking about 25 years ago. Well, I think even in the last 25 weeks, the world has changed. So imagine how it's changed in 25 years. I think one thing that I'm going to note about where we were in the world 25 years ago probably has the most profound impact in our lives and in the future of the world, and how all the dynamics that we see in politics and society and the environment hinges on this. Believe it or not, the population, the world population, when this company launched, was 4 billion people. Today, it's 8 billion people. That's a doubling of the world's population since we started. And certainly if we keep on heading in this direction, it's going to be extremely challenging. But just think, we started when the world was half the size that it is now. So that's, for me, a big one.
So doctor, let's go back for one moment if we can here, because I don't want to miss people having the opportunity to know about your books. Dr. Gutman is considered to be now the world's leading authority on glutathione. He's written a number of books, a number of research papers. If you just want to share that with everybody for a minute, because I know they're going to want to know more about how to acquire them.
Well, I'll put a slide up later on. This book I started writing 25 years ago. As soon as I met Dr. Bounos and looked at this project, I realized that it was too important for me to pass by. I changed my career just to pursue this one crazy little molecule called glutathione. So today's book, and we're in the 5th edition now, and boy, more than half a dozen different languages, is really just an extension of the first book. It just keeps on growing and growing, and honestly, every month that I'm on PubMed, I see another 30 articles that I would love to put into the next book. That's one problem with my book. It's outdated by the time I publish it, but it's an ongoing project.
Yes, it is. I know it's a labor of love for you, Doctor. We appreciate you doing that. I know it helps our business, certainly, and our education in the field. How would you say that the world has changed? If we go back, I referenced, of course, 1975, the very first collaboration between Dr. Kongshaven and Dr. Bounos. But how, in your opinion, has the world changed since Dr. Bounos and Dr. Kongshaven set out to do their research in the mid-1970s?
Well, in the mid-1970s, they really were looking at something that was completely novel. In the 1970s, medical people just did not have any focus at all on nutrition or supplementation. This was just considered strange. In 1975, cornflakes was considered a great breakfast. And athletes, before they'd go onto the court or onto the field or onto the ice, they would have steak and French fries, or maybe even spaghetti and meatballs. I mean, we knew so little about nutrition and supplementation. This is a completely paradigm that we live in now. Most athletes and most people have an eloquence about what to put in their mouth that 5% of the people in 1975 knew about. And yet, this is when Dr. Bounos and Dr. Kongshaven started looking at a natural protein to improve our lives. They were just vastly ahead of their time.
You know, Doctor, as you and I have spoken several times this week, and I always enjoy our conversations. And I think we even picked the yesterday song. I think you actually picked it. I think it was a proper analogy to today, because we're covering so much history from yesterday, but so much relevant and important history. But, 40 years is a long time, as everyone on this call certainly knows. But can you detail, if you will, some of the kind of momentous discoveries that Immunotec has made? And, I understand that you have a little slideshow as well that you can share with us that'll be pretty entertaining. So if you want, why don't you put that up and let us enjoy it with you?
I'd love to do that, barring any technical difficulties. So let me let me give it a shot here. Okay, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to plug my book as well. You can get the book at glutathione.org. But also there's some really, really good information on glutathione research on my Facebook page. That's updated quite regularly. I'm getting about 3 million views a year. So imagine that, John. When we started out, nobody knew about glutathione, and now my very humble Facebook page is getting 3 million sets of eyeballs trying to find out about glutathione. And I'm starting to put together a bunch of videos too, so you could find out on my channel on YouTube. So enough about me. Let's see if I can advance on to the next slide. Hold on one second. There we go. So here's an idea. We talked about 40 years ago, but actually I'm going to take you back way longer than that. You see that kid standing there with his funny shorts and Sunday shoes on? That's Dr Bounos. And he was born in Italy, and very fortunately in a small remote town, so that when World War II came out, although they were involved, they didn't suffer the kind of devastation that most of the rest of Europe felt. This slide here, this is Gus still in Italy, but take a look at him. He's the one in the white shirt without the jacket. Talk about style, eh? He had an Elvis haircut before Elvis was around. He had an Elvis haircut, not even being in the United States. So he was a pretty cool kid, and he grew up to be an equally cool adult. Gus, like most geniuses, I guess the best word to describe him was eccentric. He's looking really good here. His hair is in place. We took an hour to get him ready for this photograph. Usually he had his hair all over the place like Einstein, and his room was littered with papers and books, and he had a very cutting sense of humor. You needed thick skin to be around Gus, but what a brilliant man, and what a delight to be around, and how much we've all learned from Gus. Gus was a trained surgeon, and here you see in the operating room. And look at Gus's hand. You could tell he's Italian. He's got his hand up like that, going, where's my scalpel? So he was trained as a surgeon, which is an unusual background for somebody who would be ultimately involved in nutrition. Now, how did that happen? Gus came to North America, looking for fame and fortune, just like probably a lot of people on this call did, or your parents or your grandparents. He made it over to Indiana. Here's a university hospital in Indiana. They did not allow him to practice medicine. There's a certain chauvinism in the United States. If you're a foreign medical graduate, it's really tough to get a license to practice. So he went into research, and he was doing some really fantastic research in Indiana. But one day, he received a pink slip in his mail from the United States government saying, okay, thank you for your time, but your visa is now expired. You need to leave the country. Now that sounds very stressful and very unfortunate. As it turns out, it wasn't unfortunate for me and the gang up here in Montreal. In fact, they tried, several individuals tried to pass, I don't know if it's called a law or a bill in the United States Congress, trying to get Gus to stay in the United States because his research was so brilliant. But ultimately the answer was no, get on a plane and leave. Now, Gus didn't want to go back to Italy. So where he went to, and I thank my lucky stars, and I think that John Molson and everybody else feel the same way. He came to Montreal. And here is an older picture of the Montreal General Hospital. And he got to Montreal and he decided he's going to do something a little bit different. So let me explain. This was his thinking. Being a surgeon, he raised a question. Why is it if you take the same kind of patient, same age, same sex, same surgical diagnosis, why is it that some of them will make it home in a week, all healed up, and some of them would end up in the intensive care unit for 3 months? I mean, besides factors like the surgeon screwing up, but if you do everything right, there's still some people who are going to run into trouble. And they're going to have a higher incidence of infectious complications and so forth. What is the difference? And even, you know, these days in 2020, even a kid can answer that question. Maybe it's something they were eating. Here's a great poster, a vintage poster on nutrition, and especially focusing on proteins here. You see proteins, food for growth and repair, pretty cool. And you look at the list of proteins, this shows you how far back it is. They've got Frankfurters as number 5. They don't even mention soy protein, which wasn't even on the radar then. Not that soy is a decent protein, but it's just very, very interesting to look at proteins. And even then we knew that proteins had something to do with surgical repair. And those in the know had an idea that proteins were important for the immune system. The immune system, we kind of knew then that the immune system was going to fight off infection and help with healing, and it dealt with inflammation. Now, Gus is a surgeon. What does he know about the immune system? In fact, in 1975, I posed the question, what did anybody know about the immune system? So some very clever individuals who knew Gus, for example, Dr. Dieter Beer, hooked him up with a up-and-coming, a rising superstar at McGill University. Now, this person, as you can see there, besides being a beautiful woman, and I say woman because in 1975, being a woman at that level of medicine wasn't common. It was not a place where a lot of women were. These days, medical school graduates, over 50% of them are women, but that wasn't the case then. There you see this rising superstar in immunology, Dr. Patricia Kongshaven. Now, Dr. Kongshaven was an absolute pioneer at the time. The field of clinical immunology didn't even exist. And Dr. Kongshaven wrote the first chapter in the first book on clinical immunology that was widespread to the medical profession. And here you see her in front of this brand new high-tech microscope right now that would probably sell at an antique auction these days. So she was an immunologist, and Dr. Bounos had a great idea, and they teamed up and they started looking at different proteins to see which kind of proteins or which kind of amino acids would have an effect on the immune system. And they started doing some really, really interesting work. Nothing that blew anybody's mind, but it was really interesting. And they're looking at plant proteins and animal proteins and soy and algae, you name it. And one day, this box shows up on Dr. Bounos' desk. And he opens up the box, and inside of the box is this fine white powder. Wow. And attached to the box is a note, and it says, "Dear Dr. Bounos, we're a company in Europe. This is a byproduct of one of our industries. We've been taking this powder, it's a protein. We don't know what to do with it. We've been dumping it in the fields. We've been dumping it in the rivers. And the local governments told us to stop because the rivers were overgrowing." Well, that's pretty interesting. The fact that the note also included a $10,000 check also influenced Gus to do it. And the other fact was that this white powder came from Europe in 1975. It didn't come from Colombia. So he figured he would put it into his experiments. Now, if we had the mute button off, I'd probably hear a couple chuckles there. So he takes this white powder and puts it at the experiments with Dr. Komshavin. And a couple years later, lo and behold, there are mice that are receiving this protein that are living. These animals are living anywhere between 30 and 50% longer. This is spectacular. And now this is starting to draw some attention. Now, even now, John, people call us up and ask us to look at this natural product, look at that natural product. The experiments in mice have shown that the mice live 10% longer. 10%, come on. 50%, we did that 40 years ago. There's a lot of room before you can make an extrapolation to human beings. But this was interesting enough, and they started publishing some articles, and research monies started to become easier to acquire. One day, Gus, he was a great scientist, but he sure didn't take good care of himself, and he had some problems with his hips that required surgery. And just before he went into surgery, the experiments stopped working. This white protein powder just wasn't having the same effect on animals as it did before. This white protein powder happened to be a derivative of the dairy industry. And the products stopped working, and Gus had to have a surgery, and he fell into a depression and was stuck in his apartment. So what do people stuck in an apartment do when they're depressed? Now during this pandemic, everybody knows the answer. You watch TV. And Gus was watching this cooking program. And the chef on the cooking program made a statement that the cheeses that he was getting from Europe just didn't taste as good as they used to. And he explained that one of the reasons why was that many of these European countries changed their laws so that in the dairy industry, the temperature of pasteurization, the heating temperature, the regulations were that they had to be higher because they were having some problems with bacterial contamination. And boom, a light goes on top of Gus's head. It says, maybe because they're heating the dairy, the protein that we're receiving has been heated, and the proteins, when exposed to heat, fall apart. They change their shape. They become what we call undenatured. In other words, not in their natural state. They become undenatured. So he went ahead with his team and tried to resource other places that could provide this special protein from milk in a manner that the proteins were undenatured. And voila, the experiments started working again. This was the second, you know, you can be as smart as you want, but you need to have God smiling down on you, or whatever spiritual help you believe exists. The first one was a package arrived on Gus's desk. The second one is they figured out why the experiments stopped working because of a bloody TV program. And here is one of the third flukes. You see a room of scientists there over at McGill University. And you see the beautiful Patricia smiling back at the camera, and sullen, cranky Gustavo Bounos on the right side there, looking sullen and cranky. And right above Dr. Bounos' head, you see a coffee pot. Science cannot go forward without coffee. And this coffee pot was a magnet for people doing research. And over a lousy cup of coffee, Dr. Bounos ran into Dr. Jerry Batiste. Jerry at the time was a very young PhD student. He's recently, or actually for a while, he's been the head of cancer research at McGill University. Gus was telling him, look, I got these experiments where we're giving this a protein to animals, and they're stronger, they live longer, they're more resistant to infection, they're more resistant to disease, but we don't know why. And Jerry happened to be reading about this new molecule that was kind of breaking above the radar called glutathione. He says, Gus, maybe it's raising glutathione. Wow, imagine that, you know, just Gus calls it serendipity, which means, I guess, layman's term, good luck, good luck. And as it turns out, that was the case. And it took a couple of years. Here's a team of researchers at Montreal General University. You see Gus standing back there. Now he's smiling. And they established the fact that, yes, in fact, this white protein powder was raising this substance called glutathione. And it was the glutathione that was manifesting itself by improving immune function. Remember, nobody knew this. Nobody knew this. Very few people knew that glutathione had anything to do with the immune system, never mind that glutathione could be raised with a natural protein. Brand new, groundbreaking. And today, again, 2020, there's over 150,000 medical published articles on glutathione. And I think I can say with some confidence that much of this research, thousands of these articles, are as a result of the discoveries that Dr. Kongshaven and Dr. Bounos made about glutathione. No one knew that it raised the immune function and had all these other incredible beneficial effects on human beings. So I think that everybody on this call can take pride in the fact that it was your company, Immunotec, that started this vast field. So now that we knew that it raised glutathione, well, let's start looking at some glutathione deficiency diseases. And one of the things that was noted in the 1980s, and those of you who are in medicine in my age, you know that 1980s, that's when AIDS started raising its ugly head. If you got AIDS in the 1980s, it was essentially a kiss of death. And we wanted to do a human study. And it's not so easy. You just decide to do a human study. You've got ethical boards and review boards and the government to deal with. And doing a human study with an unknown substance is hard. But we applied to look at AIDS because it was described that AIDS was glutathione deficient. And I'm going to make this very, very crude. just to give you an example of how some of these things work, I guess the ethical review boards are saying, you know, these people are going to die anyways. Go ahead and have fun with your white protein powder, and we did. And the results that we were getting in AIDS patients were profound enough that everybody started paying attention. Decreasing viral load, increasing specific white blood cell that goes bad in AIDS called a CD4 lymphocyte. We got funding from the Canadian government through the HIV Trials Network. The Pasteur Institute in Europe started looking at it. Mark Weinberg, that smiling gentleman with the white coat on, he's a former head of the International AIDS Research Council for 3 terms. And of course, in the bottom left, the Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Luc Montagnier, the discoverer of the AIDS virus, put out a book. You see the book there. And in that book was a whole chapter on Immunocal, not glutathione, on Immunocal and its role in AIDS and cancer. So we started getting a lot of notoriety, and things started really picking up. Now, something else that we learned when we were doing our experiments in the hospital, take a look at this original canister of Immunocal. Now, what's wrong with this picture? We didn't know what was wrong. We thought it was a great idea. You got this canister, and the nurses would scoop out some in the morning for the patient and some in the evening for the patient. But the nurses started noticing a few things, and other people started noticing that by the end of the month, the protein didn't seem to be working as well. And we realized that having it in an open container, every time you open it up, you expose it to air, you expose it to oxidation, you expose it to moisture, the Immunocal started degrading, and which is one of the reasons why we developed those high-tech and unfortunately expensive envelopes that we put them in. This is one of our earlier boxes with 30 of the envelopes. It says HMS 90 because in Canada, we weren't allowed using the word Immunocal because I had the word immune in it. And that seemed to be too aggressive a claim. So it took us a bit of time to convince Canadian government and the rest of the world that this in fact worked. But we did. Publication after publication after publication, not just in AIDS, but in cancer, in hepatitis, in all kinds of infectious disease, in pulmonary or lung medicine, and on and on and on. And of course, all the while accumulating patents. I'm showing the American ones because the Americans online realize that it's really only the American patents that count. But we have over 80, I don't know, maybe pushing 100 international patents on Immunocal as a way to raise glutathione, to raise the immune system, as a therapy for HIV, AIDS. We have a patent for Immunocal in cancer, and on and on. I wish we would be able to use this in marketing, but please understand this. Everybody understand this. We cannot make medical claims about Immunocal in a marketing venue. Even though we have the patents and the research, you can't do that. You talk about how Immunocal makes you healthier, stronger, even smarter, but you can't make a specific medical claim. But we've proven that. A little bit later on, here's a picture of Dr. Wolf Droog. Wolf was working at a very famous place called the Max Planck Institute in Heidelberg, Germany. Wolf was a leader, not just in immunology, but in the aging process, and more specifically, oxidative stress. And of course, if you're a specialist in oxidative stress, you have to be a specialist in glutathione. And our work was compelling enough that Dr. Droog moved from Germany to Montreal to work with Immunotec. And with Dr. Droog, we really started getting into large human studies, and for myself, just to have spent time with Dr. Bounos, Dr. Kongshaven, and now Dr. Droga. I mean, I'm really the lucky one. Here's a picture of Dr. Bounos and Dr. Droga. Patricia at the time was in Vancouver. There I am, sporting a reasonably good head of hair. And that other really good-looking guy over there is John Molson. John was our vice president of research and product development for 20 years. And John was really a driving force getting things done that should have been impossible, making inroads into connections with universities and other researchers should have been impossible. And John managed to do this. Now, as you know, I was in academic emergency medicine for many years. I've taught thousands of doctors and thousands of medical students. I say that John was perhaps my best medical student. The man was a sponge. He was a glutton for learning and had no medical background at all. But we'll speak to John a little bit later on. But John is a non-medical expert in glutathione and one of the world's best. And eventually we had enough substance in our research to be able to get Health Canada to give us the rights to make an immune system claim. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but you have to understand, Health Canada is a very conservative body, but they, because of our research, allowed us to say that taking Immunocal is going to help your immune system. Doesn't sound like much. Try to find another product that has that claim. And John, being an elite athlete, said to the team, you know, you got to be looking not just at sick people. Let's start looking at healthy people. Let's look at the healthiest people there are, the athletes. And here's a study where we demonstrated in young athletes, we increased their strength, their muscle strength between 10 and 15%. And then we followed up a number of years later. We looked at healthy geriatric patients. We increased their strength by 10%. This is the difference between using a cane and playing with your kids in the backyard. I mean, just amazing stuff. And that allowed Health Canada to give us a performance claim. You take Immunocal, you're going to be stronger. And people started paying attention. I love this shot here. Why this shot? I mean, we've got hundreds of professional and Olympians. The reason why I like this shot, and this is a 2012 Olympics. You know, we had British cyclists on our products that got gold. These guys won silver. Why do I want to show a silver team rather than a gold team? Because this team, this rowing team from Canada, was by far the oldest team in the rowing events. So that struck a chord with me. These were all older athletes and taking the Immunocal and good enough to win silver. So, you know, we just continue on. I still am showing a slide that Immunotec has put out over 62 published studies. That slide is wrong. That's not the number anymore. And I'm hoping that by the end of 2020, guys, we're going to have over 70 studies. Just does not exist in our industry. If somebody has 2 studies, they're considered scientific. We're going to have over 70 studies. So John, I think I've spoken enough. When I go through this, I had so much fun putting that together. It's just a remarkable tale.